Hey everyone, how's it going? It's your boy Sealed Fawn, and today we are going to be doing an Elden Ring challenge run. Let's waste no time and get straight into the rules. Starting off, we can only use the sleep and eternal sleep status effects. Next, no spirit summons. Though there are some spirit summons that apply sleep, I wanted to test just myself. This way things will be more clear. If you want to see spirit summons in my runs, check out the Deathblight and Madness only runs, where I use summons that fit the theme. Subsequently, I must beat the game and DLC. Afterwards, I must defeat all remembrance bosses. I cannot use armor, except for Rykard, more on this later. Lastly, glitches and or exploits are allowed, so expect some cheeky ways to get around areas and take down bosses. I'm excited to share this run with everyone. The purpose of these challenges is to test the various status effects, then eventually make a PvE, then a PvP tier list. Each has their own ups and downs, so it's interesting to think where they would stand. Eventually expect me to do a tier list down the road. Make sure to smash the like button, comment, and subscribe to help support me and the channel. Now let's jump into the run. We start the run by talking with Melina and getting torn. Next, we head into Caelid using a stone sword key, unlock a crypt that will yield our first weapon. Once we acquired a weapon, I knew I wouldn't be able to wield it right away, so we were going to do some boss cheeses. Most notable was Commander O'Neill cheese. This is a fairly easy cheese to accomplish, but the toughest part is when he summons his additional units in phase 2. Especially at this low level, those attacks will probably one-shot me. Eventually we take him down and collect some nice runes to level up. Now we will be able to use St. Trina's sword. Afterwards, we head into Stormvale Castle and into Margit's fight. The sword has relatively good damage unupgraded, and so we shred through this fight with ease. Dodging and doing a bunch of jump attacks, we take down Margit and get an extra talisman slot. At the end of the castle, we find our first remembrance boss, Godric the Grafted. We ended up getting a few sleep procs on Godric, but it really wasn't useful since it procced when I was going for a riposte. Though this is early on, sleep is underperforming compared to the other status effects like frost, bleed, rot, and even poison. I'm very curious to see how this will fare later on in the game and in the DLC. Comment your predictions below. Do you think sleep will hold up in the endgame and DLC, or will it be as useless as Deathblight was? We claim Godric's Great Rune, then progress to Mount Gelmir and into Godskin Noble's fight. Sleep in a normal run is used mostly on the Godskin fights due to them being extremely weak to the status and even falling asleep. So since we were using a sleep weapon, I was really curious to see how this would do. It actually worked out phenomenally, and it would proc at opportune times, unlike when we fought Godric. After some time, we take down the Noble and have the option to fight Rykard whenever. Next, we backtrack a bit and head into Weeping Peninsula to get some sacred tear charges. This raises the potency of my flasks, giving more HP and FP the higher the level. Subsequently, we enter Renala and Morgoth's fight. There isn't too much to note in these fights. Neither of them fell asleep once, but the damage was definitely doable. One of my favorite fights in Elden Ring is Starscourge Radahn. Doing the exploit that makes him come to the player, we eventually rush in doing a bunch of charge attacks. After some time, we stagger him and even sleep him. I was surprised to see that he could be slept, but also aggravated by the timing of the proc. One attack before or even after would have been perfect, but since it was in the middle of the riposte, it's like it didn't even count. Regardless, I was really happy with the damage output. Ultimately, we take down Radahn, one of the hardest main game remembrance bosses. Entering Fire Giant's fight, let's go over a few things regarding sleep. Up to this point, sleep has been very subpar in Elden Ring. Sleep has its uses for sure, but so far it seems niche like Madness and Deathblight. Sleep on any boss that's not a Godskin will usually yield 2 R1s or 1 charge R2, which is not the best, but is definitely helpful when building up some poise damage. Is also dependent on the boss's sleep animation and recovery time, which seems to vary slightly between bosses. Last thing I should mention is that FromSoft put a ton of time and effort into the various sleep animations, which is really cool. A lot of these animations I haven't even seen before, so it's actually really interesting to watch. Next, we grab the 2 medallion pieces to enter consecrated snowfields. Taking one of the routes from the consecrated snowfields lands us in Mohgwyn's palace. Progressing through the level, we find Mohg, Lord of Blood. Mohg can be slept, but during the whole fight I didn't get one proc. Now this was unlucky. At least the weapon's damage is sufficient to take him on. By this point we have a fully upgraded weapon, so I hope it would. I should mention that there are 4 weapons in the game that inflict sleep. 2 of them can be found in the base game and 2 were added in the DLC. The other weapon in the main game is a torch, so I figured it won't even be worthwhile to use since the damage would undoubtedly be lower than the straight swords. Though we will eventually grab the other sleep weapons in the DLC. After some time we take down Moog and now have access to the DLC. Entering the Erdtree, we eventually find Melania Blade of Mikola. Surprisingly, sleep was actually fairly useful in this fight, and I was able to proc it a bunch. What really helped was doing a bunch of charge R2s and getting a ton of riposte. A few sleep procs here and there allowed me to get her stance broken much quicker. It was nice to see Sleep having some extra usage, even if it's niche. In her second phase, she transforms into the goddess Vrot, making sure we avoid her destructive attacks such as her famous waterfowl move. We press on, shaving her health bar away. In the end though, Melania gets taken down. Subsequently, we go through the remaining bosses in the main game, entering Regal Ancestor Spirit, Estelle Natural Born of the Void, Malekith the Black Blade, and the other bosses, we take them on. To be honest, I think we barely had any sleep procs, if at all, in these fights. Besides Godskin Duo and Sir Gideon, the other bosses either had super high resistances to it, or they kept doing their super move causing their sleep status meter to wear down. Either way, sleep showed to be near worthless with most of these fights. Going into Radagon and Elden Beast fight, I was like, well, sleep isn't even going to proc since both of these guys are immune. So yeah. We complete the game and initiate the ending cutscene. At the end, we claim our spot on the throne, becoming Elden Lord. The last thing we need to do before the DLC is take down God-Devouring Serpent and Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. I mentioned in the rules section at the beginning that I'm allowed to use armor in Rykard's fight, and I will briefly explain. The reason for it is to reduce stun/stagger during attacks, alongside reducing damage from the fire. Usually the player is a fair distance away from the boss, and uses the long-reaching Serpent Hunter to deal damage. Since we don't have the range, we need to get up close and ugly. This is another reason I went to grab Melania's Great Rune, to get health back from continually standing in the fire. In this fight, I had 1 sleep proc, but at first I didn't even realize it, which was pretty funny. Eventually, we take down the last main game Remembrance boss, so let's transition to the DLC. Entering the Realm of Shadows, we progress through the starting zone, grabbing the map piece alongside some other things. At the beginning of the DLC, we come across Divine Beast Dancing Lion and Relana Twin Moon Knight. Out of these two, my favorite is Relana's fight because I really enjoy the pairing playstyle. Though Sekiro and Elden Ring are different, the one thing in my mind that they have in common is that epic pairing sound. It is fun to fight her like this, but it is definitely not easy. Sleep was really only useful in Relana's fight, and I am still amazed at how much effort they put into each boss's sleep animation. Lastly, I find it extremely strange that there's that door after Divine Beast fight that leads to Anir Lim. This is because by the time you get to Anir Lim, you are teleported after fighting Ramna, so it's a bit redundant to have that door. But I digress. Ultimately, we take these fools down, and so let's head further into the DLC. Heading below Cerulean Coast and towards Putrescent Night, we find the next weapon that causes sleep, but instead this weapon causes eternal sleep. As we enter Putrescent Night's fight, I should briefly explain the differences and similarities. I'll put on screen the exact definitions of each sleep and what can occur. Essentially, Eternal Sleep is better. Eternal Sleep has the chance to allow the player to continually attack the target with them not waking up. Because of this, we will be using the Velvet Sword of Saint Trina more so than the weapon we picked up at the beginning of the game. Either way though, when sleep procs, we are able to get some attacks in. After defeating Putrescent Night, we talk to Thalier and tell him the whereabouts of Saint Trina. Talking with Saint Trina will give the player the option to imbibe nectar. The first few times nothing will happen, but after the 4th time, Saint Trina will talk to the player after the "you died" message pops up. Doing this a few more times, then talking to Thalier will progress the questline. Eventually, we get the next weapon, which is a fist type weapon that causes eternal sleep. Next, we go through a boss gauntlet, starting with Mesmer and ending with Bale the Dread. A lot of these fights, I wasn't even able to proc sleep, which was rather unfortunate. Some notable fights were Needle Knight Leda plus allies and Midra Lord of Frenzied Flame. With the NPC gang fight, we were able to get a few sleep procs, which allowed us some extra damage. Midra is just one of my favorite boss fights in the whole Souls series, so I always gotta give him some spotlight. Eventually, we take down these remembrance bosses. With one boss left to go, let's head into his fight. We enter Promised Consort Radahn's fight. This is the last remembrance boss in the game and DLC that we need to defeat. The rest have been defeated by our blade. The sad thing about this fight is that he is immune to sleep, so yeah, that's out the window. The good thing about Velvet Sword of St. Trina is that it has slightly higher critical damage at 110 compared to St. Trina's sword, which has 100. After going through a few fights, I found out that St. Trina's sword that we picked up at the beginning of the game had slightly more damage output. Getting Radahn into phase 2, Mikola will join the fight and infuse area of effect attacks into Radahn's attacks. Making sure we parry at the correct time, we make these fools suffer with a ton of riposte. Eventually, we take down a god and lord. This has been Elden Ring with sleep only. We defeated all of the remembrance bosses in the main game and DLC. While the PvP match is playing, let's talk about sleep and I'll give some final words. Sleep was surprising, to say the least, both in a positive and negative way. Positives were how many enemies could be slept, alongside the variety of sleep animations. The negatives were the extremely underwhelming effects of sleep on most enemies, allowing maybe 1 to 2 hits on them. This is alongside a fair amount of bosses being immune to it. In the end, is sleep worth using? No, not really. The only PvE applications are really the Godskin fights, though I think sleep shines a bit more so in PvP. After getting a sleep proc, it almost guaranteed I was going to get the kill. But then again, is this worth using over bleed, frost, or rot? Let me know down below. Make sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Try to do something kind for someone today, whether it's a large or small gesture. And this is your boy, Sealed Fawn, and I'm out.